Hi, and welcome to Break Free with TopRank Marketing. I am Joshua Nite, Senior Content Marketing Manager at TopRank Marketing, and I am here at Content Marketing World with Maliha Aqeel from Ernst Young. Maliha, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I saw your presentation is on the 3 C's that drive your B, or your brand, and that's putting the focus on content, customer, and culture. I know that we talk about that a lot as marketers, I feel like, and we're still not quite there. What do you think we're missing in that equation right now?
I think it's that focus on culture. I think there's still a misconception that culture is about only HR, but culture is something that's pervasive throughout the organization. Is why we choose to work somewhere, why we choose to engage with a brand. It's something that we can't always see. It's what I call the intangible, because it's aligned to our values, right? Like if your values are that you prefer a certain type of lifestyle and a certain type of philanthropy or social causes, you automatically start to look for brands that align with those values, because you believe that there's something common with them that can speak to you, what you're looking for as a customer. And that applies in B2B as well, not just B2C. And so I feel like that's something marketers don't always understand, because we focus on knowing the customer, making sure our content is what they want, but we miss the values piece, and that's where the gap can occur.
It is true. In B2B, there's this feeling that things like that are intangible in a way that our customers are only interested in their problem and our solution in the company as a whole. Do you think there are B2B companies that really get that have that culture they're developing?
I think they're starting to. I'm not sure that all of them have quite cracked it yet. I certainly do see it at EY. Like I think that when I joined, what I noticed was there was a huge emphasis on our purpose, which is building a better working world. And in everything that we were doing, we always reminded ourselves that we were doing it for that purpose. And the fact that the clients that choose to work with us believe that. They believe that it's important for companies to be part of building the better working world. And so I think I did start to see it more there. I think previously I'd seen it in B2C companies. And I'd seen them do it really well, because often with B2C companies, when you're directly working with consumers who go into your shop to purchase something, that's when they have a direct line of sight into that. And I think that's where the B2B, often you're removed from the customer in some ways. So it's certainly the end customer. And so you can lose sight of those things very quickly.
There is a little bit of that disconnect, when you don't have them coming in your door and looking you in the eye.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there can be a committee, of course, for B2B rather than just a single person.
Yeah, and in B2B, what you have is you have the influencers, you have the actual decision makers, and you have the people that sign the contract. And they're not often the same, right?
Sure.
And when you're going through an RFP or a proposal, you're often working with the procurement side of things from your client. But the procurement's not going to invite you to a proposal unless the influencers have said, hey, let's consider this company for our business. And that consideration piece is where there's an opportunity for B2B brands to really stand out. And often my recommendation is to really look at the 3 C's at that point, because you have to be considered before you can be preferred. And you can't be considered if the 3 C's aren't there.
For sure. It's almost like personality, wouldn't you say? That people will say, I like Steve, I want to go have a drink with him.
Yeah.
Versus, I like this brand for what they're putting out in the world.
Yeah, and I think if someone was to ask you, why do you like Steve, it would be hard for you to verbalize that,
It's hard
right?
to
It's a feeling. Yeah.
So how do brands begin developing that? Who leads that charge, and how does that develop?
I think that the charge is really led by the senior leadership. They have to set the tone from the top. The culture comes through, in many organizations, it's still top down. And I think it's going to take time for that to change, because just the way organizations are structured, the top down approach works. So I think they have to set the tone, but marketers and communicators within the organizations have to take the charge. And they have to say, okay, we hear you. Here's how we think you should do it. And here's how we can visualize that for you in the marketplace, whether it's visualizing through the campaigns that we run, or visualizing it through the internal communications that we work on. Our job is to take all of those values and say, here's how it could look. Here's how the intangible becomes the tangible.
That just seems like a challenge, just coming up with those values would be how they match the corporation and making sure that they aren't just like an aspirational or just a lip service kind of thing. You can have here are our values and here's our lofty purpose.
Yeah.
It may have nothing to do with what we would ever do, but this is what we say. So do you have trouble, are you seeing that disconnect sometimes in the industry?
Yeah, because I think what happens is there's still an emphasis on financial performance. And as long as there's an overemphasis on financial performance, we will see that disconnect. But recently, there was an announcement by some of the CEOs of large Fortune 500 companies saying that they are going to start focusing on the reputation. They're going to start focusing on what matters to their end customers, less about what matters to their shareholders.
Oh yes, that was a major thing, and that was huge brands like Apple and Google were involved in that, I believe.
Yeah, and we're starting to see that in the financial services as well. There's a project called Embankment Project for Inclusive Capitalism. And what that project did was they brought together asset managers, large pension funds. These are companies that invest in Fortune 500 companies and therefore are the large shareholders in those companies. And they brought them together to say, what if we started looking at the value of a company beyond its finances? And we start looking at things like reputation and what the long-term impact is of a company on society. And we actually put a value to it, so that you as a shareholder still feel like you're getting a return on investment, but that return on investment isn't necessarily dollars and cents.
But it might be, right? Like as we get more and more, consumers are getting more savvy, and as we talked about that, I just like Steve. Steve is busy polluting the earth to give his shareholders more value. Maybe I don't like Steve. So maybe it is a business play to be. Do you think it is to have more of a purpose-driven culture?
Definitely. There's a study that I quote in my presentation from Accenture, and what the study found was that 66% of respondents said that they would prefer brands that focused on the intangibles, that had a focus on sustainability, on ethics, that had a strong purpose. They would prefer to engage with those brands. And I think a huge percentage of that audience also said they would prefer to work for those companies. And if you think about the fact that there's a war on talent and has been for many years, that's where you as a brand can distinguish yourself and actually build up a talent pool that gives you a competitive advantage over your competitors.
So maybe part of it is just starting to talk about these things together. And like you said, bringing the intangible together with the business initiative and not thinking of them as two separate things at all.
Yeah, and I think that's been a bit of a challenge in my experience, is that when you work in marketing, you're focused sometimes on the campaign. You're not always focused on what the business is doing on the other side of it, because it can be slick, it looks amazing, we get the views, we get the impressions. But when someone says like, okay, so tell me how this advanced our actual business objective, whatever that was, whether it was revenue or something else, we're not always able to answer that. Because it looked great, we said, we had the vanity metrics, as I call them, the impressions, and we can't really back it up with anything that's substantive. And I think that has been something that we've been poor at, and I think we need to start getting better at positioning ourselves as a value function rather than a cost center. And I think as you start to see more generations enter the workforce, they have different expectations of brands that they work for. And it's a shift that's happened on the external side with consumers who have more power now, and it's happening on the talent side. And I think it's happening now on the leadership side too, because you do have more younger leaders coming up, right? It's not just in the startups, it's happening in large corporations too. And because that culture shift is happening in terms of leadership, the priorities of the 20th century, which was, I attended a talk once and they said the 20th century was the age of scarcity. And the 21st century is the age of abundance. And we don't necessarily have to worry about scarcity anymore, so we have abundance. So as a leader in this organization now in this era, You have to start focusing on how you continue to build, not how you just protect.
It's that kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Almost, you have, once you have your baseline of being sheltered and being able to take care of your basic needs, then you can start thinking about thriving. And then you start to look outward with the self. It's looking out at the world around you and seeing what you can do. So do you think that that's what businesses are kind of doing now? It's like, okay, we've got our survival taken care of, but now let's look at how we fit into the broader world.
Yeah, I think they're being forced to do it. They're being forced to do it by society. I will say I think it's more North American now and maybe a bit in Europe, not so much in Asia as much. And so I think a part of it has to do with the way we are in terms of our economic situations. So there is that difference there, but by and large, society is forcing companies to change. They're saying it's no longer acceptable to operate the way you've always operated. You have to put society first. You have to start thinking about the environment. It's not a nice to have, but it's trying to become a must have. And I think that's where companies are saying like, okay, if the future consumer or even the current consumer is actually going to judge us on these things and they're going to choose not to engage with us because of our practices, that means we have to change because the consumer's not going to change. They have options.
Absolutely, and that comes back to the talent aspect of it too. If you're trying to recruit people and the people that work for you are saying, I feel bad as somebody who works here about what our company does, that's not going to bring people in to interview, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to have pride in where you work. I mean, all of us now are connected to our work, I think more so than we ever were before. The concept of 9 to 5 doesn't really exist.
No.
And therefore, on whether it's on LinkedIn or Twitter or on Instagram, we want to show pride in where we work. And we can't do that if where we work is, considered an evil empire.
We would rather have a picture of being out at a garden helping to plant vegetables for a community than with a seal covered in oil.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, because we're also judged by our friends and we're judged by our community. It's not just that we're going to go into work and become a completely different person. We are the same person inside the office and outside the office, and we're judged by our community for it. So I think all of us, whether we're working for someone or we're actively purchasing their products or just engaging with the brand, I think it matters to us what others think about us when we do that. And we're connected in so many ways now that it's hard for us to compartmentalize and say, no one's going to know if I do this. Everyone eventually will know.
It seems like you might have actually discovered an upside to social media, which we don't hear a whole lot about. But it's true that societal pressure is coming for brands, and they've got to bring that culture into the equation. It just can't be an afterthought anymore.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk about, 'cause this is a marketing issue. I feel like you were talking about the internal marketing as well, that leadership is the one that is going to lead with this purpose. But then do you feel like it is the marketing department that is going to get that message out to employees?
I think they will do it in partnership because employees' touch points vary across the organization depending on where they are, right? And they're depending on how large an organization it is or how small, there's still multiple layers between marketing and the employee. So I think marketing has to start seeing themselves as partners with HR, with the leaders within the middle management. They have to definitely be the ones that create and shape the narrative, but they can't always be the one that distribute that message because they may not have direct access, and it may not be credible coming from marketing either, right? So the credibility sometimes lies with the middle management or with your direct manager. If you hear from them, you're like, you know what, like, yeah, I get it, because you actually have a level of trust with that person, whereas you might not have it from, if you get an email from, let's say, a shared mailbox, national marketing, you're probably going to be like, I don't know who this is. Like, who's the person behind it?
Or even they don't know who I am.
Exactly.
Why should I listen to them? They don't know me. They don't know the reality of my work.
Yeah, it's a relationship business. Relationships are built on trust, and trust comes from one-to-one interactions. It isn't really built in an email.
Although you did say, and I wanted to talk about this because it's one of my pet things that I keep pushing that people don't believe. You said, I'm one of those people that believe email is not dead. We just haven't been smart about how we use it. And I absolutely agree with that. But I've got to ask, so how have we not been smart about it, and how can we get smarter?
I think we haven't been smart about the fact that email isn't just something you send when you want something from someone, right? If you think about especially internal communication, we send emails to employees because we want them to know something. We never send an email because we think it's good for them, right? We say like, oh, we've got new benefits coming up. Here's an email with everything you need to know. But hey, by the way, you need to sign up in 2 weeks, or we'll sign you up in whatever we want to, right? It's very self-serving. But I think you can get smart about using emails by actually asking people what they want to hear from you, right? Like, what are the kind of stories they're looking to hear from you? How can we shape that experience for them? Because that's for me, people say like nobody reads emails. I think the analytics disprove that. When you look at analytics, people do read emails, but they read emails that are meeting their needs. They don't read emails that are self-serving to us as an organization.
So it's about applying really the same rigor that we apply to content to email.
Yeah. I mean, email is a form of content, right? It's a channel, but it's a form of content. It's the way you lay it out, how you structure the message, who the message comes from, how personal it is to the person receiving it. I think sometimes what I found is on the external side, marketers can do it really well, where they can segment their audience groups and they can personalize the message to what that segment wants. I think on the internal marketing side, we haven't been able to do that as well. We still tend to lump all employees as one employee group, not recognizing that there are different levels of their career, different experiences, different business units, and what they're looking for from us as a brand who they want to work for is very different. And how do we personalize that? I think we need to find ways to do that, but it goes not so much from a technology perspective. I think we have to go back to actually understanding who they are, what they want, and then thinking about the right message for them.
That's so sharp, because we would never have a single persona for anything external marketing. You would be tarred and feathered if you said, here's my persona for marketing. But we do tend to think of, here's employee is a single persona. That's very sharp to think about differentiating them.
And I think one of the things that I've noticed companies still aren't doing, which seems obvious to me, is we create customer journey maps. Why don't we create an employee journey map? When someone joins us, do they not deserve the welcome onboarding package from us? Do we not need to figure out where they are at the start of their career with us? Where do they want to go? And how do we start mapping the touch points and the kind of content we need to have at those different touch points? I don't know why we don't do that. I mean, I'd love to be able to start doing those things more, because I think that will make the experience more meaningful. And if you think about the fact that you may have 500 people working for you, well, those 500 people are also your consumers, and they're your brand advocates, or they're your brand detractors if they don't have a great experience.
So their brand experience is as important as the customer experience.
Yeah.
And how they have an experience is going to relate to how they interact with customers, so that feeds the customer.
Exactly.
It's a
loop.
It's all connected. Yeah, it's so holistic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thinking about these broader trends that you're talking about, where brands are moving into being more concerned about culture and being more concerned about the world, and in a way feeling that pressure to move into those spaces. Where do you think that this is going? Like in the next 5 years, what do you think we're going to see with brands?
I think we're going to start to see that there's almost an integration of all of these functions: marketing, HR, communications. There's going to be an integration between them, so that you don't have silos working on different things in their own little niches, but rather it's likely going to be a broader function within a brand. And each of them will be expected to partner, and they will be held to account for partnering in the right way, because no one department owns a brand experience. It's owned by everyone. And so I do think that that's going to happen. It's starting to happen in some fashion in small pockets of the business. But I think what we need to do is have it be more concentrated, because otherwise you will continue to have a disconnect in the brand experience among different types of audiences.
And I can see that as people would say, well, how do you know that all brands are going to do this? You say, well, the successful brands are going to do it, and the rest of them aren't going to be around anymore, so it's going to perpetuate itself for sure.
And I think you as a brand have to ask yourself, are we in it for the long term, right? Like, do we want to be around 50 years from now, 100 years from now? If we want to be around, then we have to change, because if we don't change, I think we've all seen you get left behind.
For sure.
How do we break?
Yeah, that's our big question that can mean whatever that phrase means to you. Like we're thinking about B2B business, of course, but it could be break free from, well, I won't say because that will color your perception of the question.
I know
so,
what you should
all right.
break free from. I've already mentioned vanity metrics, but I think my biggest break free is marketers rely too much on technology to solve the problem. Technology is something that should come at the end. You almost need to invert that thinking, and you need to start with your customer journey map, right? Start with where you are, where the customer is, what are the experiences and touch points you want that customer to go to, and then start to map what are the solutions and technologies that need to apply at every touch point. Because if you don't understand the problem you're trying to solve, technology won't solve it for you. But I think we love our slick technologies, we think it makes it easier, but it actually keeps adding complexities until it's just something that's all shiny but doesn't really help us in the end.
So too many times we say, if we could just find the right solution, and of course there are plenty of companies, some of them very wonderful, who are out there, it's like, just plug this in and you'll be done.
Yeah.
And really, you're saying it comes back to start with the customer and end with the customer and keep that loop going.
Keep that loop going, and I think the solution that you apply at each touch point of that journey is going to be a different solution. There isn't one technology to solve everything, but I think if you go into it saying, oh, I want technology to do this, it won't actually help, because you haven't gotten to the root cause of the problem. You're applying a band-aid. And so you have to start with, what's the root cause of the problem? What's the issue that we're trying to solve? And then ask yourself, how am I going to do it? Sometimes the tried and true traditional ways of marketing actually work really well. You don't need technology, but there's a time when technology is great and it can actually help you and amplify the solution. But if you start with technology, all it really does it covers it up. But then you still keep coming back to the same issue. Maybe, if your issue is customer retention, you implement this really great technology solution to it, but you still find the churn is there because you haven't gotten to the root cause of your churn. You've just focused on the one thing.
It's a symptom instead of the cause.
Yeah.
All right, so no more, to break free, we have to get rid of our B2B Band-Aids.
Yes.
And we got to focus on our 3 C's.
We got to focus on the 3 C's.
Absolutely. Well, Maliha, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sitting with us for a little bit.
Thank you for having me.